A Critique of Interventionism by Ludwig von Mises. Chapter 4 Anti-Marxism. Part 2 National Anti-Marxian Socialism. Marxian socialism is beckoning class war, not national war. It is proclaiming never again imperialistic war. But it is adding, in thought, civil war forever, revolution. National socialism is beckoning national unity, peace among classes, and it is adding in thought war on the foreign enemy. These solutions distill the ideas which are dividing the German nation into two hostile camps. The great political problem of Germany is the national one. It appears in three different forms: as the problem of the linguistically mixed territories at the borders of German settlement in Europe, as the problem of German immigration, a creation of German settlers overseas, and as the problem of foreign trade that must provide the material support for the German population. Marxism did not see these problems at all. It could say that in the socialistic paradise of the future there will be no national struggle. National hatred is the transformed class hatred. Its holder is the middle class. Its beneficiary, the bourgeoisie, proclaim the party literati. How could there be national conflicts after class distinctions and exploitation have been abolished? The national problem is a world political problem, the greatest world problem in the foreseeable future. It concerns all nations, not just the German nation. During the 18th and 19th centuries, when the English and French formulated modern political doctrines, it had a different meaning for them than it has today. The first civilized country for which the national problem became important in its present form was Germany. It should have been the task of German political theory to deal with it and find a solution through practical politics. The British and French did not know all those problems of nationalism for which the formula of national self-determination does not suffice. German politics did face these problems for decades, and they should have met the challenge by finding a solution. But German theory and practice could only proclaim the principle of force and struggle. Its application isolated the German nation from the world and led to its defeat in the Great War. Where the areas in which the German people settled meet with those occupied by the Danes, Lithuanians, Poles, Czechs, Hungarians, Croats, Slovaks, Italians, and French, the population borders are not clearly marked out. In wide sections the people are mixed, and individual linguistic islands, especially urban centers, reach far into foreign areas. Here the formula of self-determination of nations no longer suffices, for here are national minorities who fall under foreign rule if the majority principle determines political government. If the state is a liberal state under the rule of law, merely protecting the property and personal safety of its citizens, the alien rule is less palpable. It is felt more keenly the more society is governed, the more the state becomes a welfare state, the more egotism and socialism gain footing. For the German nation, a violent solution to the problem is least satisfactory. If Germany, a nation surrounded by other nations in the heart of Europe, were to assault in accordance with this principle, it would invite a coalition of all its neighbors into a world political constellation, enemies all around. In such a situation Germany could find only one ally, Russia, which is facing hostility by Poles, Lithuanians, Hungarians, and possibly Czechs, but nowhere stands in direct conflict with German interests, since Bolshevist Russia, like Tsarist Russia, only knows force in dealing with other nations. It is already seeking the friendship of German nationalism. German anti-Marxism and Russian super-Marxism are not too far apart, but various attempts at reconciling German anti-Marxian nationalism with the anti-Marxian nationalism of fascist Italy must fail in dealing with South Tyrol, just as reconciliation of Hungarian Chauvinism must fail in dealing with the West Hungarian problem. A violent solution to the question of border Germans would be less acceptable for the German nation itself than for its neighbors, even if there were prospects for its realization. In fact, Germany, even if victorious on all sides, would need to be prepared for war at any time, would have to brace itself for another war of submission through starvation, and would have to prepare its economy for such an eventuality. This would impose a burden which, in the long run, could not be borne without some serious consequences. The trade problem which Germany needs to solve during the 19th century grew from a worldwide shifting of production to areas with more favorable production conditions. If there had been complete freedom of movement, a part of the German population would have immigrated. for German agriculture and some branches of industry could no longer compete with newly opened, more fertile countries offering more favorable production conditions. For national political reasons, Germany sought to prevent this immigration through tariff policies. We cannot elaborate here why this attempt was doomed to failure. The migration problem is the third form of the practical political problem for Germany. Germany lacks territory for its excessive population, and again the pre-war theory of German nationalism discovered no better solution than violence through conquest of suitable territory. In Europe, tens of millions of people live poorly, who would do much better in America and Australia. The difference in the living conditions between a European and his descendants overseas continues to grow. European immigrants could find overseas what their native countries failed to offer, a place at the banquet of nature. But they are too late. The descendants of those who 1, 2, or 3 generations ago chose the New World over Europe do not welcome them. The organized laborers of the United States and the British Commonwealth countries permit no addition of new competitors. Their labor union movement is not aimed at employers, as the Marxian doctrine prescribes. They are waging their class war against European workers whose immigration would reduce the marginal productivity of labor, and thus wage rates. The labor unions of the Anglo-Saxon countries favored participation in the Great War in order to eliminate the last remnant of the liberal doctrine of free movement and migration of labor. This was their objective, which they adhered to completely. Countless Germans living abroad were uprooted, deprived of their possessions and earnings, and repatriated. Today, strict laws either prohibit or limit immigration not only to the United States, but even to important European areas. And the labor unions of the United States and Australia unhesitatingly would favor a new, more horrible and bloody world war if it should become necessary to defend the immigration restrictions against an aggressor, such as the Japanese or a rearmed Germany. Here are the insurmountable difficulties of the Marxian doctrines and the policy of the Communist International. Theorists sought to escape the difficulties by not mentioning them. It is characteristic that copious pre-war German literature on economic and social policy, which again and again dealt with the same matter in tiring detail, contains no work that could explain the policy of immigration restrictions. And abroad, only a few writers dared touch a topic that obviously did not harmonize with the doctrine of the workers' class solidarity. This silence, better than anything else, reveals the Marxian bias in social literature, especially German literature. When finally the international conventions of socialism could no longer escape dealing with this question, they skillfully circumvented it. Let us, for instance, read the minutes of the International Convention of Socialists in Stuttgart in 1907. It adopted a lame resolution characterized by the recorder himself as rather awkward and hard. But this should be blamed on circumstances. A socialistic convention is not held to write novels. Hard realities are colliding, which finds expression in this hard and awkward resolution. This is a euphemistic way of admitting that something is wrong with the harmonious thoughts of the international solidarity of workers. The writer therefore recommends that this resolution, so painfully constructed on the middle of the road, be adopted unanimously. But the Australian representative Kroner crisply declared, "The majority of the Australian Labour Party opposes the immigration of coloured workers. As a socialist, I personally recognize the duty of international solidarity and hope that in time we shall succeed in winning all nations of the world for the idea of socialism." Translated from Australian to English means, "Make it as many resolutions as you please. We shall do as we please." Since the Labour Party has come to power, Australia, as is well known, has the strictest immigration laws against coloured and white workers. The nationalistic anti-Marxists of Germany could perform a great service by solving the immigration problem. The German mind could develop a new doctrine of universal freedom and free movement that would evoke an echo with Italians, Scandinavians, Slavs, Chinese, and Japanese, and which in the long run no nation could resist. But no beginning has yet been made of what needs to be done. And surely nothing has been accomplished. National anti-Marxism proved to be unproductive in the very point on which its greatest emphasis must be declared, the problem of foreign policy. Its program for the integration of the German nation in the world economy and the world policy does not basically differ from the precept of German policy in recent decades. In fact, it does not differ from recent policy more than any theoretical doctrine differs from the realities faced by the statesman, who was kept from his intended course by his daily tasks. But a violent solution is even less applicable today than it was in pre-war Germany. Even a victorious Germany would be powerless to face the real problems of the German nation. In the present state of world affairs, Germany could never prevail over the opposing national interests of other nations. That is, it could not acquire overseas territory for German settlement, and open up favorable markets for German industry. Above all, it could never be safe from a resumption of the war by a new coalition of enemies. National anti-Marxism is failing as well in providing suitable German policy for pressing present problems. In their struggle against forced integration, the German minorities in foreign countries must demand the most comprehensive democracy, because only self-government can protect them from losing their German identity. They must demand full economic freedom, because every intervention in the hands of the foreign state becomes a means of discrimination against the German population. But how can the German population in the border territories fight for democracy and economic freedom if the Reich itself conducts a contrary policy? National anti-Marxism has also failed on scientific grounds. The fact that the Marxian theories of value and distribution have lost their prestige is not the achievement of anti-Marxism, but that of the Austrian school, especially Bombewerk's critique, which the young friends of theoretical economics in Germany could no longer overlook. Surely the attempts by some writers to confer prestige on Marx as a philosopher have little prospect for success, because, after all, philosophical knowledge in Germany has reached a level that makes scholars somewhat immune to the naiveties of the philosophy of Marx, Dietzig, Vorlander, and Max Alder. However, in the field of sociology, the categories and thoughts of Marxian materialism continue to spread. Here anti-Marxism could have solved an important task, but it was content with attacking those final conclusions of Marxism that appeared to be objectionable politically, without refuting its foundation and replacing it with a comprehensive doctrine. It had to fail because for political reasons it sought to show that Marxism is animated by the spirit of the West, that it is an offspring of individualism, a concept alien to German character. The very starting point is fallacious. We already mentioned that it is not permissible to contrast the universalistic collectivistic with the individualistic nominalistic systems of social doctrine and policy as set forth by Ditzel and Pribram, and now advocated by Spahn with his nationalistic German anti-Marxism. It is also erroneous to view Marxian socialism as the successor to the liberal democracy of the first half of the 19th century. The connection between the socialism of Marx and Lassalle and the early democratic program was rather superficial, and it was disregarded as serving no further purpose as soon as the Marxian parties came to power. Socialism is no improvement over liberalism. It is its enemy. It is illogical to deduce a similarity of the two from an opposition to both. Marxism does not spring from Western thought, as mentioned above. It failed to find followers in Western countries because it could not overcome the utilitarian sociology. The greatest difference between German ideas and those of the West is the great influence of Marxian thought in Germany, and German thought will not be able to overcome Marxism until it sheds its hostility toward British, French, and American sociology. To be sure, it cannot just adopt the sociology of the West, but it must continue and build anew on its foundation.